I'm going to start, Doug, with you. You've spent the last 30 years representing individuals in the criminal justice system, but also trying to better the system, make it more just and equitable. Can you summarize, to begin with, the landscape of the criminal justice system for us here in Georgia?
Sure. And so to do this, I thought we have a little bit of a drawing or a graph, if you will. And if we could, thank you for pulling that up. Thank you. So this is I've been in the criminal justice system working for quite a while, and trying to explain the various functions I find to be, it's helpful to have a visual for those folks who are not in the criminal justice. And this visual is just an arc, but most people in the criminal justice system talk about the system in really three chunks. And the first is the front end, from really policing, arrest, the prosecution of a case, to the resolution of a case. Assuming there's a conviction, you get to the second stage, which is not always true, but incarceration. Most folks think about it that way. So the middle chunk is after the case is over and someone is serving a sentence, if you will. And the back end is the third chunk, which includes people being released from custody, but they can still be under correctional control on probation or parole. And of course, even if you're through with those things, you still have a criminal record, whether you've been convicted or even not convicted. So when I talk about the system, it's really an easy way to sort of see the system in this sort of chart, if you will. In this chart, thanks to Lisa's help, we've plugged in some Georgia numbers to give you a sense of how big this system is in Georgia. And so, for instance, there's the issue of how many people are currently in jail awaiting trial on their case, felony or misdemeanor, which is roughly around 40,000. The Georgia prison system, the number varies, but it's usually around 54,000, 52,000 people who are serving time in the prison system. And then on probation and parole, there are another really 400, somewhere around 400,000 people on probation and parole for their misdemeanor or felony. And in Georgia, people who have been through the system or touched the system in any way, from the very big tip of the red chart all the way through, that number in Georgia is 4.3 million. So 40% of Georgians essentially have a criminal record, someone who's been arrested, they've been booked in, and they have a fingerprint number assigned to them. Now, one other piece of information I want to talk about is just who's under correctional control. Georgia, unfortunately, has been the winner of the highest number of people per capita under correctional control for a number of years now. We have basically 1 in 18 Georgians are under correctional control. That means jail, prison, probation, or parole. And this chart really shows you, unfortunately, every state in the country as a percent of the population of people who are in jail, prison, probation, or parole. And Georgia leads the country by far. You can see by far. This chart usually shocks people, as it should. Those of us who are trying to make the system better know the reality of this. I want to point out on this chart, although we're not going to spend a lot of time probably talking about this at all, but the reason Georgia has such a high number is really around probation. It's not our straight incarceration numbers. We have by far the largest number of people per capita, I think 3.5 times the national average on folks on probation. And so that's one reason that we have this large chart, the large bar, the orange at the top of that chart. So you can see in Georgia, we have some work to do. There's been some great gains, no pun intended, Representative Gaines. But some great gains not only this year, but under Governor Deal in the past 10 years. But there's still good work to do.
Thank you, Doug. Senator Anderson and Representative Gaines, I know you're both committed to a more equitable and inclusive Georgia, and that is in part what this conversation is about. When you look at that arc and you see just how many people in Georgia are impacted and are involved in the criminal justice system, the largest number is the 4.3 million, the number of people who have a criminal record in Georgia. The two of you collaborated by passing landmark expungement this session, a landmark expungement bill this session. And this bill allows rehabilitated individuals the opportunity to restrict and seal some convictions after a period of time. And that's monumental because before this bill passed, your record stayed with you your entire life, regardless of how small it was and regardless for how long ago it was. So this takes down huge barriers to employment and housing for those involved in the criminal justice system. Again, 40% of all Georgians have a criminal history, so it affects almost half of all the adults in our state. So let me start with you, Senator Anderson. What brought you to care about the most recent expungement bill that you authored and passed? Why was it personally meaningful to you?
Well, I got the idea initially from a colleague in Philadelphia. I attended a conference last year, and she presented, and what I heard, it just made sense. And looking at that chart, thanks for presenting that, Doug, because Philadelphia is right behind Georgia. So ironically, she came in to present, and it just made sense. And so I was like, can we do this in Georgia? And everybody in the room just had an aha moment, like, wow, that it just makes sense. So I thought about bringing it to Georgia because I was thinking, enough is just enough. So what happened that was meaningful for me was the fact that I have conversations with people in the community. I don't just ask for people to vote for me. I actually have conversations. And when I find out where they are, where they've been, what they're dealing with, I thought, we've got to do something. And I didn't know what that something was. And it's been burning in me, for some years now, I guess, since I've been in the General Assembly, and, just listening to some of the bills being passed and listening to, people's reactions about, where Georgia is. And if we're on the bottom for everything all the time, we've got to change some things. And so I realized, talking to people, being impacted by the fact that they can't vote, by the fact that they don't have a job, just kind of getting personal with them. And it sparked me to try to push for some meaningful legislation around criminal justice reform to allow people to get their lives back.
Thank you. And I'm wondering, Representative Gaines, as a Republican, what brought you to care about this bill, and why was it personally meaningful to you?
Sure. Well, thank you, Lisa, for putting this together. And it's always kind of hard to thank Georgia Tech, but I will do that. And no, it's great to be here. I am in Athens, and I am a Georgia fan. I think that was mentioned at the onset. So, but we can have bipartisanship in politics and in sports. So, but anyway, I do appreciate you having us. And it's kind of funny. I was just sitting here thinking about the question. And I remember, Lisa, us in Georgia Justice Project, we met right here in this office about a year ago, and it was more than a year ago, I guess, where we started having this conversation, where you and Doug and folks came over to Athens, and we started having this conversation. And I know that Senator Anderson's been leading the charge on this, and for me, it was something that I know we worked. It was kind of the piece of legislation that it was the train that, seemed like it was about to get stopped, and then we just kind of kept it moving, and was just honored to be a part of it. I know there were a lot of different versions floating out there, and a lot of different ways we were all working together to get this thing over the finish line. And for me, I just felt like it was the right thing to do at the right time for our state. We've made some significant progress on criminal justice reform. But I felt like this was an area where we really need to make some more progress. And particularly after our conversations last year, over the past 12 months, was just excited that we had crafted a piece of legislation that everybody got behind. And, in the end, one of the things I'm most proud of this piece of legislation for is that it was bipartisan, and it was unanimous passage on both chambers, and that we had folks from, the far left to the far right, political groups, senators, representatives, everybody came together on this thing. And that is so rare in politics these days. And I wish that more folks would focus on issues like this, where we can come together, because if we did stuff like this instead of some of the more divisive things, we get a heck of a lot more done. And this is going to impact, as you said, 4.3 million Georgians. Senator Anderson, I remember right after it passed out of the Senate, it was you and I and one of your colleagues in the Senate talking. And they said this is one of the top two most important bills we passed this year, but it's not going to get as much attention as a lot of the bills. But truly, I believe this is one of the top couple things that we've done this year and the last couple years, and I'm really proud to have been a part of it.
Absolutely.
That is so true. And I don't think our audience probably knows just how hard it is to get a bill signed into law. There are probably 900 bills that are introduced every year and about 100 get signed into law. So you don't have a really high hit rate. And that brings me to my next question. There were at least 5 different expungement bills floating around the chambers in 2019. So what made 2020 different?
Well, I'll start. Honestly, I had no idea about the other 5 bills from 2019. Apparently, I had tunnel vision or was in my own little world or something. I guess I just had no idea about the other bills, and maybe because they started in the House. But I pre-filed 3 major bills I felt that were major for 2020, and I wanted to see them pass, and I was just trying to get movement on them. So I missed all of the hoopla from 2019, and it's funny because when I recall you, Lisa, coming to me, and I appreciate you so much, I really, really do, coming to me and asking me, where did you get this bill from? Where did you get this from? And I told you it was called the Clean Slate Act, and I got it from Philadelphia. That's what they called it in Philadelphia. And I guess I was like, what does she mean by that? And you were like smiling and giddy and all excited. And then one day we met in my office, and you told me that a bill had been out, several bills had been out. And I had no idea, but I'm glad. I'm so very glad that we made the connection. And I think this year was different because we took a break. We were in recess. The bill was introduced. It passed the Senate in March. And we were unanimously out of committee and everything. And we were in recess because of the outbreak. And then we came back in June, and it was just a lot happened during that, between March and June, that shifted the mindset and opened the eyes of America concerning racial equality and the criminal justice system. So as we reconvened at the end of June, I think it was, a moment for people to say, it's high time that we move on this legislation to start something that could change the trajectory in Georgia. And I think that's why it happened. I really honestly think that that's why it happened. And of course, as Representative Gaines said, with the bipartisan support, how could you lose by, presenting something as strong and powerful that would impact people's lives? I'll tell you this real quick, and I'll pass the mic. I was talking to a close friend, and he said, you're a minister, but what you just did with this bill will impact more people than you could possibly do in one sermon. And it's honestly true. 4.3 million people impacted in Georgia, and that's a lifesaver.
Well, unless you want to add something, Representative Gaines, I want to ask another question because it is very powerful. So what else needs to change in Georgia?
Well, just to follow up and answer the question at the same time, Senator Anderson is spot on, in terms of when we first started working on this legislation, I don't think we could have ever imagined what would have happened in our country over the last few months. And it was, I think that this was a piece of legislation that can help us bring us together. And it was, again, an area where we all agree. And I think we all recognize there's reforms that we've got to make. And this was one of those areas where we need to make a change. And I do think there's more places that we've got to make a difference. And I think even with this legislation, there's more work we got to do to continue to make sure that Georgians have a second chance. But I can't overstate how important I think getting this piece of legislation through, getting our foot in the door, because we were one of only 9 states that didn't have something like this. So I believe this was a huge first step that's going to allow us to continue to make progress. And I couldn't think of a more important time for us to make that step forward as a state. And again, I just think these are the areas, fortunately, over the last several years, Georgia has made significant progress on criminal justice reform. And it's been all bipartisan. And so I look forward to making sure we continue to work in a bipartisan fashion to address these challenges and make sure that we deal with them head on.
So will you elaborate on that, Representative Gaines, in terms of any more specificity in terms of what needs to change in Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that, again, this piece, one of the pieces of legislation we worked on originally, or the original draft of this legislation, also included other offenses. So I think that we could continue to look at other offenses that make sense for providing restrictions, maybe potential automatic seals for folks once they've gotten the restriction process completed. So I think looking at areas where we continue to make progress here, I know that the citizens arrest statute is something that we're going to take a look at next year in the General Assembly. So I think there are areas where we've got to continue to move Georgia forward, and those are just a couple of examples.
And if I may, Lisa, do you mind if I? Okay. So thank you, Representative Gaines, for bringing that up. And citizens arrest is definitely one of those things. And I also wanted to, Lisa and I spoke about shortening the probation time in Georgia, because that's where the long reddish orange line on Doug's graph showed that that's where we are, leading in is probation. So we've got to look at, shortening the probation time, and because anyway, we just need to shorten the probation time. And also in felony disenfranchisement that allows citizens to vote, Senator Harold Jones introduced a bill in 2019 about allowing people who have been convicted of felonies to vote. It got a committee hearing, but most people, the recommendation out of the committee was to just keep things as it is. Not sure why, but that was last year. So we have a different view of what Georgia should look like now, and so hopefully we can move in that vein. And then, ending unnecessary jail detention for people who are awaiting trial, for low-level offenses, and a lot of it is low-level offenses. So just those a couple of things. And then the school to prison pipeline. So that's a United States issue, but we can do something in Georgia.
Well, Senator Anderson, what do you think the appetite for change is in Georgia?
Well, Lisa, I'm glad you asked me that question. I'm not sure right now. I'm not sure. I say that because it seems as if we made progress this past session, but then got pushed back, in another direction. So, for instance, we passed the hate crimes bill, and that was, to begin improvements and in our state, and just, a bill that was presented, to bring about some meaningful change. Well, right after that, a bill was presented to make attacks on police officers a hate crime. And the bill was actually unnecessary because they are already in a protected class. So that's one reason why I'm not sure. And then the other reason why is, we passed Senate Bill 288, Go Team Criminal Justice Reform. We did it. It was a start to something that we can expand, as Representative Gaines said. We can look at automatic restriction, and that's something that I would love to continue to work on. But then after we passed 288, then the bill was passed. I resisted it, of course, to remove cash bail. So I'm just not sure what the appetite, for change is in Georgia, and I want to believe that everyone is there to save Georgia and to make her better. But I just don't know. I can't give a definitive answer on what's the appetite right now.
Representative Gaines, would you also give me your input on that as well?
I think that we, it obviously, we all know there's a contentious election right now, and that, frankly, is probably going to take up the next 30 semi days. But my hope is that, we get through this election cycle and we have the opportunity as a state to really work together again. And I think that, Senator Anderson and I showed this year that, hey, we're not going to agree on every issue. I mean, that's just reality. She and I voted differently on different bills. And by the end of the day, we were able to come together on really meaningful change. And I think that appetite's still out there. I know I'm committed to it. And I think that we have leadership in the General Assembly that are committed to that. And so my hope and my prayer is that we continue to work in a bipartisan fashion to address some of these challenges, because I know that if we come to the table with an open heart and an open mind, we can sit down. And like I said, we may not always agree on how to approach it, and we may disagree on certain issues, but at the end of the day, I believe we'll make a lot more progress that way than instead of fighting on TV. We'll get a lot more done by sitting down at the table, and that's how we worked on this legislation. It wasn't one that frankly got a whole lot of attention, and honestly, I think Senator Anderson and Lisa and all of us, that might have been a good thing throughout the process. We wanted to get this thing passed. We didn't care about attention. We cared about helping Georgians. And that's how we need to continue to operate, is going in what's best for the state, not best for politics or anything like that. So I think we've got to continue to work that way. And I do think there's leadership at the Capitol that wants to continue to work in that way, and I hope we'll continue to do so.
All right, thank you both. I'm going to turn the question to a little bit of a different, this series is about racism, inequity, and inclusion. And we've talked about some of the inequities in the criminal justice system, the long probation sentences, how many people we have under correctional control. But let's just talk about racism in the criminal justice system for a minute. I'm going to ask all three of you, but Doug, can you share your perspective on this?
Sorry, I was just unmuting. Sorry, sorry. On the involvement, racism with regard to the system generally?
In Georgia.
In Georgia. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise, unfortunately, to anyone about the gross disparities of the criminal justice system with regard to race. Michelle Alexander is well known for writing a book called The New Jim Crow, that when this country pushed forward the war on crime and the war on drugs, starting significantly in the 80s, which led to this gross disparity of incarceration this country has vis-a-vis every other country in the world. So there's a disparity for Americans. There's a similar, deeper disparity, if you will, for folk of color who are being arrested, convicted, and incarcerated. And so the unleashing of those sort of particularly mandatory minimums, for instance, is a good example of how people end up, how we've created the mass incarceration numbers that this country has. But particularly, for instance, in Georgia, African Americans make up about 37% of the population, but historically it's been almost 2x that in the prison system. It's gone down a little bit. There has been some movement. I think it's 57 or 56% right now, is one indication of how the disparities work. There have been studies in Georgia, particularly by writers from journalists as well as some sociologists, that talk about the similarly situated people who are charged and convicted of a crime in Georgia, one black, one white. The person who is black is much more likely to get a more severe sentence, much more likely to get a incarcerated sentence in that middle part of our chart, so to speak. So yeah, you unfortunately, the criminal justice system is a deep but dark reflection of disparity, of a significant disparity in this country as regards to race.
Senator Anderson, would you like to add any thoughts?
Well, I agree with Doug and the fact that, racial disparities have just been a huge undertaking and disparaging in this country, and it has shown up in other states, in some states more than others, and it's just a place where we have to have a conversation. It's a sensitive subject, but we have to have the conversation. It's a tough conversation to have, but it's necessary. And so, as Doug said, that there are longer sentences, there are sometimes over policing, there are just small things that get people caught up in the system, from a tail light to a left turn or no blinker, or just small things. And even as I mentioned before, the school to prison pipeline, it starts so early, that by the time, someone is 15, 16, 17, they've had an encounter, and then at 25, 35, they've been in jail. And so we have to fix this system, and it's terribly broken. But I appreciate this conversation and having it. But we have to have more of them and just have be honest about it and transparent so that we can fix it.
Yeah, and just to follow up, for me, I agree with what was said in terms of we've got to have conversations, and I think that's not only in the criminal justice system, but racism in our society. That's how we're going to make change. And if we don't sit down at the same table and have the conversation, again, as Senator Anderson just said, these are challenging conversations a lot of times. But we've got to have them. That's how we're going to make progress. And that's what we've got to do as a state in terms of criminal justice reform, but also just as a society in general. I mean, this issue's obviously been highlighted over the last several months, and we need to have this conversation. When this really came to the forefront, just even at work, some of the conversations we were having, that needed to happen, and those sort of conversations have got to continue. And so I hope that as a society we really have those conversations and find some solutions.
And I'll add this last thing, Lisa. I promise I'll stop. It is not just about the racism; it's a systemic racism, because it's not just in the criminal justice system; it's in education, it's in economics. It's just a systemic issue, and so we have to go deep. We can have the conversation, a little bit at a time, but we have to go deep eventually, so that we can get to the root of the problem.
Right. Yeah. Thank all three of you for being so honest in your answers. I'm going to turn to there are a lot of questions. So I'm going to turn to some of the questions from listeners, viewers. So the first is, what was the reaction and feedback? This is for you, Senator Anderson and Representative Gaines, from your fellow party members when you first started working on this issue jointly, and how did their attitude change when your efforts succeeded? And is this viewed as an exception to the rule, or maybe as an opening for more bipartisan efforts in the future?
So, that was a loaded question, very loaded question. I should have written all of it down, but if I miss anything, Lisa, let me know.
Okay.
So when I first introduced this bill, I think my colleagues, the Democrats, they were, oh, okay, that's a nice little bill. I don't think they thought it would pass, honestly, because we're not in the majority. That's just an honest answer. And so I went to my leadership and I said, this is the bill I want, got signatures. And, I was going to turn the bill in. And then I said, you know what? I didn't even ask my Republican colleagues would they support it. And I did. I asked 2 Republican colleagues. They supported it. And I submitted my bill. I think having, and I say this, and I mean it with all my heart, having built relationships means so much. And I'll say that because I was in the House. Lisa introduced me and I was in the House. I didn't get one bill passed over there. I probably introduced like 1,000 if I had the opportunity. But I'm sure I introduced 10 or 12 bills. Nothing passed. But in that, I built relationships. Honestly, Representative Gaines wasn't there when I was there, and I was gone before he came. But one of my colleagues who is in the Senate, who is a Republican, was also a freshman with me in the House. So I had support there. I had support from my leadership. And I don't think that they even thought about because there's a more mature kind of conversation that we have. And I don't think they even thought about what other parties thought. And they did, I'm sure, but I didn't think about that. What I thought about was helping the people of Georgia. So when Representative Houston Gaines introduced it on the House, I didn't know him. I had never met him before. We met in the hallway. To me, it didn't matter. I wanted to make sure that this bill was going to impact all of Georgia. So what I found is that, and I said this to Lisa and Doug, I was wondering why I was in the House and why I was there for so long. I realized that it was building relationships. So the chairman of the committee, the Speaker of the House, I had built relationships with those gentlemen, and they remembered me. They remembered me. And so when my bill came, and they knew, people always look at signatures on. They always look at the author. They always look at the co-signers. And when they saw that it was my bill, I'm sure, in their mind, they were, oh, we know her. But it was because of my relationship with them. And I'm grateful for that. So even now in COVID, and you're at home and you may not be working and things may be happening with you, don't look at a waiting moment, waiting for things to get better, waiting for things to be. Don't look at that moment as a wasted moment. My moment in the House wasn't wasted. I built relationships while I was there, and it made it really easier for me to pass my bill. And I want to thank you, Representative Houston Gaines, for having just being a gentleman and having the heart to want to help and be willing to work together. And that goes a long way. So now I have a relationship with Representative Gaines.
Yeah, and to your point, well, thank you. I was honored to work with you on it, and to what Senator Anderson said, it was funny when we first met. We both been kind of working on this thing. I think we both, I'd be texting and working on House members and Senate members. She'd be working on Senate members and House members. And, what you learn, as she just said, is it's all about relationships. And that's how you get things done. And I think to Senator Anderson's point, she is extremely well respected by Republicans and Democrats alike. And for me, I'm in my first term. I'm working towards that and feel like I've developed really good relationships on the House and Senate side with folks in both parties. And that's what I am going to continue to work on, because I think that's how you move real policy forward. So for me, it was something that the question, I guess, was how was reception among your own party at the beginning? And to be honest, it took some convincing. I mean, we had to work it, and it was there was a lot of folks who were just uncertain about it. There was never opposition. It was just, oh, that sounds good, but we were working on these other things. And it took really sitting down with our leadership and committee folks and folks on the committee where the bill went and saying, no, this is a priority. This isn't just something we need to talk about. I really want us to get this bill through because it's the right thing for Georgia. And so it wasn't, there was never opposition. And obviously with the vote on the floor, you see that. But there was a lot of, that sounds nice, sounds good. But, we had to really, I think, especially during COVID, when a lot less legislation was passing just due to time constraints, we all had to make sure that we put this at the top of the priority list for folks in the House and the Senate. And fortunately, we had folks like the Speaker, like Chairman Trey Kelly, like Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, Regina Quick in the Lieutenant Governor's office, who is the predecessor in my seat. So it's amazing how these things all work together. And that's, again, this was kind of the piece of legislation that I think about 10 times we all thought, oh my gosh, it's going to die. And then, next hour later, you get a text and you say, we're good to go. And it was just amazing. I mean, every time, and this is how good legislation works, but it would come down to the wire. I mean, it passed on crossover, it passed on sine die, it passed, with an hour to spare. The governor signed it the last day of signing. So it was just always exciting. It all kept us all on our toes. I think we all were roaming around the Capitol trying to figure this thing out as it would move. But it was the right thing to do. And so I'm glad that, between Senator Anderson, myself, the Georgia Justice Project, and so many other solicitors across this state, judges across this state, the governor's office. I mean, this was a true teamwork, and we all came together and we got it done. But it was not an easy process, but nothing good is easy. And that's how we were able to get it over the finish line.
Oh, wow. That's a good point, Representative Gaines. Nothing meaningful is easy. And I'll say this, Regina Quick was in my freshman class as well. So go figure. we served together, and she said, I want to make sure your bill, I mean, we were calling, it was just so unbelievable. Metro Atlanta Chamber, Georgia Justice
That's
Project,
right.
Home Depot, all of the, corporations came together. It was a community bill, and it's because it's going to impact the entire state economically. And so I thank you for making that point, because it took all of us, even to the point of you calling me saying, hey, can you be here tomorrow? The bill is going to be signed. And I was like, I don't know, but I'll make a way. And we did. And it was, everything was a team effort. Everything was a team effort. And I am so grateful for this opportunity to serve alongside of each of you.
Well, that feeds right into the next question, which is, again, for you, Senator Anderson, Representative Gaines, what would be the next policy issue the two of you would agree on and would want to move forward together on?
Man, you're gonna have to give us some. We need a little time to do homework on that question. But again, what's that?
You need a sidebar chat.
Yeah, I know exactly. For me, I don't necessarily have something specific, but I know that I would love to work together again, and because I just think it's a very good statement for our state to have us two working together, and I think that those sort of relationships and those sort of that sort of progress is something we've got to continue, especially at a time right now where we are so divided as a country and where we are facing significant challenges. I think that this partnership is one that's important and one I'd like to continue.
Well, you mentioned something earlier about automatic restrictions, so we can have a conversation about that with Lisa and Doug and see where we can go. And the GBI, just to see where we can go.
Doug, this question is for you. You've worked on this issue for over 20 years. Is it satisfying or frustrating that it took so long to have a resolution to an issue that you recognized through your direct service work with clients long ago as being so crucial?
Well, I think a little bit of both. I always say I'm an optimist, so I really I always think that we're trying to create something with both of our individual work with clients as well as our policy and broader work. This has been an issue we've been pushing. I mean, let me go back even further so folks know our nonprofit actually started a landscape company in the early 90s to employ our clients because we stay with our clients in the prison system and follow them out and their families. So many people couldn't get jobs because of criminal records, of course. And so we decided to do something about it, and we said we started our own business. And for 17 years, we ran this landscape company that employed a handful of people, at most 40 people in a year, but it was our effort to try to deal with this very issue. So we tried a number of things to deal with the issue of the impediments created by criminal record on the individual level. And then when we moved into policy work about 12 years ago, this was always the front and center issue for us. And we found, I'll be honest, what we found is that we were going to have a stair-step ladder to move into this issue in the legislature. And we had to sort of educate a lot of people about the barriers, the pervasiveness of it. And then our first big success less than 10 years ago was getting non-convictions to come off your record, which does happen automatically now. But my point only is that a lot of legislators and the average public didn't realize that. So I think you've got to, I think in the criminal justice work especially, it's such a hard arena that you've got to have the long view. You've got to be willing to put in the time. These are not going to be quick hits and you're out. I mean, this isn't because you also, just as Representative Gaines talked about, you've got to convince some people that this is an issue they should care about, and you've got to make the connections to how it's going to help everybody. So, I'm a little frustrating, certainly, but I'm always rewarded by the individual work our clients, the work we do, and seeing clients move forward. And having this wonderful kind of result is huge, and it's worth the wait. So a little bit of both.
Okay, to everyone, this is a great question. What would you recommend students, Georgia Tech, UGA, all students, learn now about these issues to position themselves to be authentic and transformative leaders in the future? So I guess it's what can students do now to be in a position to make a difference? And that's for Doug, Senator Anderson, and Representative Gaines.
I was trying to write down the question.
I can
Go ahead,
start, I guess, real quick is, for me, what I would encourage students to do is get engaged with the legislative process because, one of the things that I found having been in the General Assembly, and Lisa, you mentioned the onset that when I was at UGA, I was student body president. If you as a student really get invested and have conversations with your legislators, they're extremely approachable and they're willing to talk to you about issues. And, for me, when I was a student, I, was able to work on some actual policy stuff with the General Assembly. That's where I got my first introduction to the state capitol, frankly. And I would encourage students to have those conversations with their legislators, get to know them. If you have ideas, research this issue of criminal justice reform, come up with an idea and bring it to Senator Anderson or myself. Go find your local legislator from home, or go find, some legislator that went to Georgia Tech and actually even better, find one that went to UGA. But, for me, that's what's been so cool about the General Assembly is it's kind of interesting. In the House, we share one administrative assistant between 6 or 8 members. In the Senate, I know y'all are one admin assistant to 2, but frankly, as legislators, you do the work. You really get constituent calls. They're not answered by some machine. They're answered by your legislator. And if you send us an email, if you want to have coffee or a conversation, that's what we're here for. And I would just encourage students to really get to know your legislators, get to know your city council folks, and that's where you can really make a change.
I agree. Get involved early. One of the things I encourage college students to do is participate in an internship. There are opportunities for internship at the Gold Dome, and as Representative Gaines says, ask your legislator. Just create an opportunity and start attending council meetings and county commissioner meetings just to see, what the process is, how things happen. But becoming an intern would be even great. And there are programs that students are selected from colleges, different colleges, for you to become an intern at the Capitol. And if you have a younger sister or brother, they can become a page. So they can page from the age of 12 every year until they graduate from high school. So it's an opportunity for you and your family, your younger family members, that is. So yes, internships, getting engaged in the meetings locally, and just getting involved at a very early age will help you, help us. And like he said, if you have a piece of legislation, if you think of something that you know would impact Georgia, then present it to one of us or even your legislator.
Yeah, those are all great. We need more people to be active at an earlier age, for sure.
Yes.
Well, the next question is a technical question, and it's open to anyone. But I think, the question is, what portion of those under probation are under supervision of for-profit versus state-run probation offices? And I think maybe it might mean misdemeanor versus felony probation, because most misdemeanor probation is run by for-profit, and all felony is run under the state, the Department of Community Services. But the following question is, and actually it's about a half and half. If there are 400,000 probationers, half of them are under misdemeanor probation, which is a year or less, and the rest are under felony probation. But the next question is, do for-profit organizations play a role in maintaining the large number relative to other states? Do you want to answer that, Doug?
Sure. Yeah, the for-profit companies do not work in the role of felony probation or felony supervision. So no, the answer is no. There is sort of no engagement at a for-profit company in Georgia. It's all run by a state agency, which is called DCS, we call it for short, the Department of Community Supervision, Probation and Parole. It was renamed a handful of years ago, Combined Probation and Parole. That's a state agency, a very large agency that basically is not a for-profit agency.
Thank you. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Dory, or Dory, should I ask the last question for everybody, or do you want me to turn it over to you? Okay.
You go ahead, Lisa.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, you
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, so there's one last question for everybody. And the question is, we ask, Georgia Tech has asked each of our guests to leave everyone with a call to action to help us expand our understanding and take action on social justice, racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our personal and professional lives. So why don't we start with you, Senator Anderson. What is your call to action?
I would say to take an opportunity to educate yourself and find out where you fit in to make the difference.
Great.
So, just
go for it, right?
Yep.
Representative Gaines?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I would just encourage people to do is kind of what we've talked about tonight, which is have those conversations. Find somebody who you know, may not be as interested in the issue of criminal justice reform or some of the issues that we are addressing, and have a conversation with that individual so we can spread the word. We can have the conversation about what we've done in Georgia on this one issue, but we all recognize there's more to do. But I would just encourage folks on campuses, college campuses, or where conversations are supposed to happen, ideas are supposed to be brought forward. And I would just encourage students to take these conversations back to your student organizations and your student groups, and you know, start these conversations on a college campus, and let's find more solutions together.
Thank you. And Doug?
Well, you know, I think at the heart of racism in this country is an otherness that we, as a culture, have embraced, or has been part of making people other. And I believe that one of the best ways to break through these internal and external barriers that are created, that we have in ourselves, that are in our culture, is to get close to people. And I think also that the criminal justice system is an added layer, if you will, of otherness. So when we talk about the criminal justice system, we talk about like these disparities, we're really talking about a layer of a power differential, of often a racial differential, an economic differential. And I can think of no larger calling that we have as people is to sort of get out of ourselves, to get close to people who are different from us, and to release our power and engagement with people. And I think, unfortunately, the criminal justice system is replete with those kinds of opportunities right now. And so I would encourage people to find out, to think about where they have power, think about how they understand themselves and the other, and to get, as my friend Brian Stevenson would say, get proximate to something that is difficult, get proximate to the other. And in that, if you're proximate, I mean, I think that's what our work is about. We just got proximate. Our founder got proximate to issues, and then we just kept moving through them. And it's created a momentum. And I think that's what can happen in the world when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, when we're humble, and we get close to people who are different from us. It can lead the change. Sorry to preach, Reverend. Sorry to preach.
No, amen.
No, that was amazing. And all I would add is, and please vote.
Yes.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Senator Anderson. Thank you, Representative Gaines. Thank you, Doug. Thank you very much for all the work you all do, and also for participating tonight.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.